Anakin Skywalker, instead of wielding his traditional blue lightsaber, is given a different color, one that represents a shift in his fate. How would this affect his choices, relationships, and ultimate transformation into Darth Vader? Anakin Skywalker stood alone in the ancient caves of Ilum, his breath steady, his thoughts storming. He reached out with the Force, drawn to a strange resonance, deeper than the familiar hum of his blue lightsaber. His hand landed on a crystal that shimmered between violet and gold, glowing with a strange, undeniable energy. It wasn't what the Jedi expected. When he returned to the Jedi Temple, all eyes turned to the new color of his blade. Master Windu frowned. Yoda tilted his head, thoughtful. Obi-Wan watched in quiet awe. The council gathered in meditation. A lightsaber color so rare, it was no coincidence. They believed it was the will of the Force. In a move that surprised the Order, they decided not only to accept the blade, but also to elevate Anakin Skywalker to the rank of Jedi Master. They saw the crystal as a sign. Perhaps the Chosen One's path had shifted. And so, Anakin took his seat on the council, not with bitterness, but with a growing sense of purpose. But the crystal did something more. It changed the way he felt the Force. His meditations deepened. His visions became clearer. The pain, the fear, the desperation he once carried, began to ease. He still loved Padme, but he no longer feared losing her. He trusted the Force. Even Palpatine, who once whispered temptations into his ear, found it harder to twist Anakin's mind. When the Chancellor tested him, probing his loyalty, urging him to embrace power, Anakin hesitated. Not out of doubt, but out of wisdom. He began asking questions. Why did Palpatine know so much about the Sith? Why had he waited until now to reveal it? And why did he want Anakin to keep it secret from the Jedi? In this new light, Anakin saw more than he had before. The power of the violet gold saber wasn't just in its color. It was a mirror, reflecting what lay deep within him. Not anger. Not fear. But balance. And slowly, the destiny of the galaxy began to shift. One decision. One crystal. One Jedi Master, reborn. The Jedi Temple felt different now. Anakin Skywalker walked its halls not as a troubled knight, but as a newly appointed Jedi Master. The change echoed in every step he took, in every conversation he had. For the first time, the council looked at him not with suspicion, but with cautious respect. Obi-Wan Kenobi offered a rare, proud smile. "You've earned this, Anakin," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But Anakin didn't bask in the pride. He felt the weight of the title. The Force seemed to press more firmly around him, as if testing his readiness. He met with Master Yoda in the meditation chamber. The ancient Jedi spoke softly, "A test, this is. Not of skill, but of spirit." Anakin nodded. He understood. With his new role came responsibility, transparency, and access. He began to read deeper into the Jedi archives, discovering truths about the ancient Sith and forgotten wars that the Council rarely discussed. He was no longer kept in the dark. Knowledge, once hidden from him, was now open. And that knowledge shaped him. He understood the fragility of peace, the slow corrosion of trust, and the clever manipulations that could slip through even the highest ranks. Palpatine noticed the shift too. He summoned Anakin to his chambers, as he had so many times before. But this time, Anakin sat upright, calm and unreadable. The Chancellor tried to stir doubt. He praised Anakin's power, hinted at secrets the Jedi would never share. But Anakin didn't bite. He asked questions. Questions Palpatine didn't expect. "How do you know so much about the dark side? Why do you speak as if you understand the Sith?" Palpatine hesitated. The balance of power had changed. Anakin was no longer the lost boy from Tatooine, craving approval. He was something more. Not just a warrior. A thinker. A protector. A Jedi Master with eyes wide open. The Force stirred around him, no longer clouded. And far away, shadows began to retreat. Not with violence. But with clarity. The Chosen One was beginning to see. The Clone Wars were still raging, but something had changed in the way Anakin Skywalker led his troops. He was no longer reckless with power, no longer driven by frustration or personal pride. His decisions were sharper, more deliberate. Clone troopers noticed the shift. "General Skywalker seems different," Captain Rex said quietly. Anakin stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the stars, sensing distant pain in the Force. He was learning to feel not just through emotion, but through wisdom. The mantle of Jedi Master gave him more than authority. It gave him discipline. And with that discipline came compassion. When he arrived on the war-torn world of Maijito, he refused to bombard the Separatist stronghold from orbit. Instead, he led a surgical strike, minimizing civilian casualties. Even Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, known for his rigid tactics, was surprised by Anakin's restraint. This was not the same brash Jedi Knight from years past. This was a man who now understood the weight of every decision. Padme Amidala, watching from Coruscant, saw the change in his transmissions. His eyes were calm. His voice steady. He spoke of peace, not as a dreamer, but as someone determined to make it real. Meanwhile, Chancellor Palpatine continued his quiet manipulation. He urged Anakin to be wary of the Jedi Council. He spoke of betrayal, of their so-called weakness. But Anakin, with access to all council meetings now, saw no betrayal. He saw leaders struggling to preserve a galaxy. He began to question not the council, but Palpatine. One evening, alone in his quarters, he stared at his lightsaber, the rare violet hue glowing softly in the dark. He whispered, "What if I've been looking in the wrong place all along?" The Force trembled around him. Visions came, not of Padme dying, but of the galaxy burning, because of his own rage. And in that moment, he made a vow. He would not let fear control him. Not again. Not ever. The Jedi Master within him had awakened. And the galaxy would feel the difference. One mission at a time. One choice at a time. The war was not yet over. But Anakin Skywalker was no longer a pawn. He was becoming the guardian he was born to be. The Galactic Senate had grown louder, more divided, and more desperate. Chancellor Palpatine's power continued to expand, masked under the guise of security and stability. But Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master, saw through it. He sat beside Master Yoda and Master Mace Windu during a private council session, watching Palpatine's latest emergency decree play across the hollow screens. The Jedi had always known that power could corrupt, but now they had proof. And Anakin brought it to them. He had intercepted private messages, documents encrypted with Sith code, hidden beneath the Chancellor's executive orders. He didn't just suspect the truth, he knew it. Palpatine was the Sith Lord. The same one who had clouded the Force for years. The same one who had orchestrated the clone wars from both sides. It was Anakin who said the words. "He is the Sith we have been searching for." Mace Windu's face hardened. Yoda closed his eyes, grief settling like a storm in the room. Obi-Wan Kenobi looked to Anakin, not as a brother, but as an equal. "What do we do now?" The plan was set in motion. Not with secrecy, but with unity. The Jedi would confront Palpatine, together. Anakin stood at the head of the strike team, his violet lightsaber igniting with quiet power. They entered the Chancellor's office with caution, yet determination. Palpatine greeted them with cold calm. "So, the Council sends its champion," he said, eyes narrowing at Anakin. Anakin did not respond with anger. He spoke with clarity. "Your reign ends today." The battle was fierce. Lightning split the walls, sabers clashed in bursts of fire and fury. But the Jedi were prepared. And Anakin, balanced by purpose, not pride, was the final key. He blocked Palpatine's strikes, matched his darkness with light. And with a single blow, ended the Sith Lord's twisted empire before it could rise. Silence fell over Coruscant. The galaxy trembled, sensing a new future. One forged not in fear, but in justice. Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Master, had not fallen. He had risen. And in doing so, changed the destiny of millions. Padme Amidala stood on the balcony of her apartment, staring at the lights of Coruscant, her hands gently resting on her stomach. She was carrying life. But inside, she carried something else. A storm of fear. Fear that the galaxy was spinning too fast. Fear that Anakin would be pulled into its chaos. But lately, something had changed in him. The last time he held her, his voice wasn't frantic or desperate. It was calm. He told her everything. The Council had made him a Jedi Master. They had trusted him. He had stood against Chancellor Palpatine, not for politics, but for the greater good. Padme saw the men she fell in love with, not the lost boy or the wounded warrior, but the protector. The father. Anakin visited her more often now, though the war still raged. When he did, they would sit in silence, holding each other without words. And she noticed he no longer spoke of nightmares. No longer feared losing her. One evening, she asked him quietly, "What changed you?" Anakin looked at her with soft eyes and whispered, "The Force, and you." But the galaxy was still uncertain. Senators whispered of corruption. Armies remained divided. And even with Palpatine gone, scars remained. Padme, ever the voice of reason, returned to the Senate floor. She spoke with more strength than ever. Her words were carried across systems: peace is not given, it is chosen. Let us choose it now. And the people listened. Because they saw something in her eyes. A reflection of the Jedi Master who once stood alone in war, and now stood with her in peace. Anakin walked beside her, not in secret, not in shame. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol. Of healing. Of change. Of love that endured. Together, they prepared a new life, for themselves, and for the child they would soon welcome into a very different galaxy. A galaxy with hope. A galaxy where the Chosen One had not fallen to darkness, but had risen in light. The war had ended, but the Republic was broken. 1,000 systems cried out for leadership. And in the power vacuum left behind, whispers of control and fear began to rise. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master and hero of the Clone Wars, stood at the edge of this chaos. The Jedi Council had survived, though wounded. The Senate remained, but trust had been shattered. People feared what would come next. It was then that Anakin did something no Jedi had done in generations. He stepped forward, not as a conqueror, not as a politician, but as a bridge. He proposed a new alliance. One that would bring together former separatists, Republic loyalists, and the Jedi. But to do this, he would need help beyond Coruscant. And so, he turned to the Mandalorians. The galaxy had always feared them, warriors, proud and brutal. But Anakin saw something else. He remembered Bo-Katan Kryze, leader of the Night Owls. He remembered their brief alliance during the siege of Mandalore. He reached out to her again. And she answered. Their meeting was tense, guarded. But she listened. Anakin spoke of a future where Mandalorians could be more than mercenaries or exiles. He offered them respect, recognition, and peace. And in return, they offered loyalty. The Mandalorians had resources, warriors, and knowledge of the Outer Rim. With their help, Anakin led missions to restore order, not with fear, but with strength balanced by mercy. The Jedi Council, skeptical at first, began to see results. Anakin's leadership brought stability faster than anyone expected. He wasn't rebuilding the old Republic. He was forging something new. A unity that the Sith could never have created. One night, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood beside him on a hill overlooking a rebuilding city. "You've done something the Council never could," Obi-Wan said. Anakin looked to the horizon, where stars slowly pierced the dusk. "I didn't do it alone." He thought of Padme. He thought of the child soon to be born. And he thought of the future. Not built by the sword, but by the will to protect. A new age had begun. And Anakin Skywalker stood at its heart. The Jedi Temple stood quiet under the twilight of Coruscant. Anakin Skywalker entered the High Council chamber alone. The seat once reserved for Master Yoda remained empty. The weight of that silence filled the room. Yoda had departed for exile, not in shame, but in sorrow. He had seen the darkness rising long before most. He had warned the Council. But it was too late to stop the cracks that had already formed. Still, Yoda believed in Anakin. And before he left behind one final teaching. Not in words, but in presence. In trust. He looked into Anakin's eyes and said, "The balance, within you, it rests now." Anakin had never felt more humbled. He wasn't the same young knight who questioned orders and feared loss. He was now a master. Not because of title, but because of clarity. He led not with dominance, but with wisdom. And as the Jedi tried to rebuild, his voice became the compass they followed. The Jedi Code was no longer enough. Not after so much death. Not after the betrayal of Palpatine. Anakin gathered the remaining masters, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Aayla Secura, Plo Koon, and others. Together, they spoke not of war strategy, but of renewal. A new Jedi Code was born. One that allowed for compassion without fear. Love without shame. Emotion without corruption. Anakin stood before the next generation of Padawans and said, "We were wrong to cut ourselves off from feeling. The Force is not only about control. It is about connection." His words echoed across the galaxy. The Jedi were no longer monks in ivory towers. They became guardians who listened, who walked among the people. And though Master Yoda lived far away, deep in the swamps of Dagobah, he smiled quietly as the change rippled through the Force. He had not failed. Anakin had not fallen. A new dawn had risen. And the Jedi were reborn. Not as warriors, but as keepers of balance. Just as the prophecy had always foretold. The Chosen One had fulfilled his destiny, not through destruction, but through transformation. The galaxy still bore scars. Worlds once vibrant were reduced to ash. Cities once united had been divided by fear. But hope had not been extinguished. Anakin Skywalker, now a Jedi Master, looked beyond the Jedi Temple for solutions. He knew the Republic could not stand alone. The Jedi needed allies. And so, he journeyed beyond the core worlds. He went to Mandalore. He met once more with Bo-Katan Kryze, leader of the Night Owls. Their past battles were complicated, but bound by mutual respect. This time, Anakin came not with troops, but with trust. He spoke of rebuilding peace, not through dominance, but through unity. He invited the Mandalorians to take a place at the table. Not as enemies. Not as exiles. But as brothers and sisters in a new era. Bo-Katan listened. And then, she agreed. Mandalore pledged its warriors, its resources, and its honor to the Alliance. Other systems soon followed. Planets long ignored by the Senate answered the call. The Jedi Order, once feared as disconnected, now stood among the people. Anakin's leadership was not flawless. But it was real. He made choices with conviction. He accepted mistakes. He did not hide from pain. Together with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Padme Amidala, he created bridges where walls had stood for years. Mandalorians patrolled side by side with clone veterans. Jedi walked marketplaces instead of only battlefields. The people no longer saw symbols. They saw protectors. They saw peacekeepers. They saw change. Anakin watched a generation of younglings train in the temple courtyard. Some were Jedi. Some were Mandalorian foundlings. All were learning the same truth. That power was not in the blade, but in the choices that guided it. Bo-Katan stood beside Anakin as they looked out over Coruscant. "Who would have thought?" she said with a half-smile. Anakin smiled back, his eyes reflecting the stars. "We didn't just survive," he said. "We became something better." And across the stars, the Alliance grew stronger. Not by force, but by trust. A new republic. A new order. And at its heart, the Chosen One who chose peace. The Force had always flowed through Anakin Skywalker with intensity. But now, as a Jedi Master, that power no longer surged wild and uncontrolled. It moved through him with balance. He sat in silent meditation beneath the great tree in the Jedi Temple gardens. The wind stirred the leaves, and the galaxy felt still. For the first time in his life, Anakin was not afraid of who he was. He had faced his anger. He had faced his fear. And he had not run from them. He had chosen a different path. A path of clarity. A path of truth. One that embraced the entire spectrum of the Force, light and dark, joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability. He did not suppress emotion. He understood it. And through that understanding, he became whole. The Jedi around him saw the change. Padawans looked to him not just as a warrior, but as a mentor. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi admitted one evening, "You found something the rest of us are only beginning to understand." Anakin nodded, not in pride, but in peace. The ancient prophecy had spoken of one who would bring balance to the Force. For years, the Jedi believed balance meant eliminating the Sith. But Anakin had learned otherwise. Balance was not destruction. It was harmony. The dark side had once tempted him because of pain, loss, and confusion. But he had faced those shadows, not by fighting them with rage, but by embracing the light within him. Even Master Yoda, far away in exile, felt the shift through the currents of the Force. He knew balance had been restored. Not through war, but through awakening. Anakin visited the sacred caves of Ilum once more. He stood among the glowing crystals, the same place where his journey had begun. This time, he brought younglings. They watched him closely, eyes wide with hope. He said only one thing before leaving them to find their crystals. The Force is not just power. It is purpose. The galaxy was healing. And the Chosen One stood, not as a legend, but as a man who had found peace. True balance, at last, had been born. The Jedi Temple stood tall under the twin moons of Coruscant, its spires glowing in the pale night. Inside, the council chamber was silent. But the Force was not. It moved. It breathed. It whispered of something long awaited. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, had not fallen. He had risen. Not by rejecting his emotions, but by understanding them. Not by obeying blindly, but by seeking truth with courage. The Sith were gone. The war was over. But the Jedi were not the same. They couldn't return to the old ways, not after so much loss, so much blindness. The old code had kept them pure, but also distant. It had taught control, but not connection. And now, something new had begun to grow. A new Jedi Order. Anakin stood before the council, joined by Obi-Wan Kenobi, Aayla Secura, Plo Koon, and the next generation of Jedi. He spoke, not as a warrior, but as a teacher. "We lost our way when we tried to remove ourselves from the galaxy," he said. "We must walk among the people again. Listen. Learn. Lead with humility." The younglings watched him closely. They saw a man not untouched by darkness, but redeemed through it. They saw hope. Padme Amidala stood in the background, her child in her arms. She had been his light in the shadows. And now, their love was no longer forbidden. It was understood. Accepted. Even embraced. The Jedi were changing. They trained not only with sabers, but with open hearts. They served not only as peacekeepers, but as companions to the people. Missions of war became missions of healing. Temples were rebuilt not in isolation, but among the stars. And through it all, Anakin walked the path not of a savior, but of a guide. He was no longer defined by what he could destroy. He was remembered by what he helped rebuild. The Force moved freely again. The prophecy had not lied. Balance had come. And in every corner of the galaxy, from Naboo to Mandalore, from Tatooine to the farthest stars, the name Anakin Skywalker was no longer spoken in fear. It was spoken in gratitude.